Welcome to another episode of Assess That with Tom and Nat.
And happy Monday, everyone. We hope everyone had a great weekend and that you are all ready for the week ahead. So Tom and I, fun fact, just returned from a week in Hawaii. Please don't hate us.
Aloha.
Aloha. Tom had 4 days of work on Oahu. And of course, I would never miss the opportunity to come along and work at the hotel, which at this time was something called the Royal Hawaiian.
Or as some people say, the Pink Palace. So let's chat for a minute here about, there's some obvious things, right? There's the beaches, the sun. But what's your favorite part of Hawaii besides the obvious, which is, the sunshine, the beaches, the swimming? Like, what would be some of your favorite parts of Hawaii?
You know what? It's actually it's the same thing that I enjoy about Palm Springs, which is that it feels a little time-stamped in history.
Yeah.
Like, Hawaii really opened at this earlier part of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have this very 1920s, 1940s aesthetic in a lot of the architecture and the buildings and the design that's still, especially the Royal Hawaiian, which is the second oldest hotel on the island of Oahu, second only to the Moana Surfrider, which I also love.
Yeah.
But I love classic, historical architecture. So
I love that. The timestamp of those two hotels makes it feel like early 20th century. But Hawaii always reminds me of that mid-century aesthetic because I think the 50s and 60s and 70s is when Hawaii really came of age as a vacation spot.
Like Palm Springs.
Like Palm Springs. And so you get that mid-century. For me, of course, besides the Mai Tais, which I never have until I go to Hawaii, then it's Mai Tai Nation, just trying to find the best Mai Tai.
Mai Tai Nation.
But that's right, the pursuit of excellence. Monkey Pod, by the way, is the best Mai Tais. For me, it's similar. I just love the culture and the way it lends itself to that sort of laid back, even in a work environment, because we're not always going for a vacation. I'm going for 4 days of work. And even in the work environment, there is a sort of relaxed notion to the work. And it isn't complacent, but there's just a sort of veil of the island feel to it and the culture that is immersed in the work. I do love that part of it as well. And of course, it's hard to beat the weather and all of that. But to me, the cultural underpinnings of Hawaii that are still very present and very prominent are something that I really, really love.
Absolutely. Okay. Big news, exciting news.
Yeah.
April 9th and 10th, both of us, plus our fellow consultants with the Canadian Assessment Centre, will be hosting the Canadian Assessment Conference, our spring conference, which will be right here in Vancouver, BC. The cherry blossoms should be in bloom. So really hope you can join us there. There's links in the show notes for all those events.
Now, a big welcome back to any returning listeners and a big welcome to any new listeners joining us for the first time. We appreciate all of you.
Absolutely. Today, we are so excited to welcome Karley Alleyn, who is not only one of our Canadian Assessment Centre consultants, but a great friend of ours.
Yeah.
She's an educator, a consultant who has dedicated her work to helping teachers reimagine assessment with clarity and confidence.
Right. Karley supports educators with workshops, coaching, and her Assessment Accelerator program. She's passionate about making assessment practices more equitable, competency-based, and empowering for both teachers and for students.
So that's today's plan. Let's get into it.
Today, we are thrilled to introduce you to Karley Alleyn, one of our Canadian assessment consultants, and a leading voice in rethinking how teachers support assessment and the assessment work and how they approach it. Karley is an educator and a consultant whose master's research explored the idea of assessment identity, something we will explore later during this conversation.
Yeah, and through her Assessment Accelerator program, she helps educators move from frustration to confidence, making assessment more equitable and meaningful for students. We are so excited to talk to you, Karley. And first of all, welcome.
Thank you.
We're so happy you're here in the studio with us.
Very excited to be in the studio with you.
Now, first of all, listeners, Karley and I have to come clean. We actually go way back beyond just the Canadian Assessment Centre and the assessment work. No, we go back to middle school where we were both competitive rhythmic gymnasts.
We do. We're from the same small town and grew up together in the gym.
Yes, indeed. Karley was a little bit more successful than I was.
There were different levels,
to put it lightly.
So you were developing and she was...
I was like novice, if that. Like I was like the pity novice, like on the proficiency scale. Karley was exemplary and won all the awards and was exceptional, which impacted your assessment identity, which is something that we're going to talk a lot about today. But it's funny because this is actually what brought us back together. Okay, quick little how this all happened.
Yeah.
You were doing your research, your master's research on assessment identity. You interviewed Tom as a leading voice in assessment. And as he talked about his work and his circle and network, my name was mentioned. And you're like, there can't be two Natalie Vardabasos. Like that's
It's
such
a very original.
it's original, all right. There literally is one family in the world. And so you were like, oh my gosh, this is weird. And so we reconnected on Instagram. And I think we like trauma dumped our past of being elite athletes.
I remember you telling me that.
Until
how
like
you...
1 a.m. Like we were in the Instagram DMs being like sharing our deepest, darkest wounds. And
It happened.
the friendship was rekindled. And now here we are as colleagues in this Canadian Assessment Center.
Yeah.
What a weird thing.
It's
Right?
so wild. I still think about that, which wasn't that long ago.
No.
And it's wild that here we are at the table together working alongside one another in the same work.
This is
like,
amazing.
I truly believe everything happens for a reason, though. This was meant to be.
Yeah, meant to be. And here we are. And it's not really why we're here, but I'm sure listeners would love to hear more of the childhood memories and the stories. And
I'm sure they would.
what was in those DMs until 1 a.m. We want to know the content of all of that. The stories.
Oh.
Of what
There were some good stories that we shared. Actually, things that I didn't even know about your experience that you shared that I was like, oh my gosh, for real?
Oh, I know. Because I hadn't talked about it ever until I talked to you, and we kind of
You're welcome.
created this safe space to share. So thank you so much.
Anyway, why we're here. I'm sure listeners would love to hear all of those childhood stories, but we want to get into the assessment conversation. And before we dig into some of your more recent work, think about education writ large before we get into assessment. What drew you into education, and then how did the pathway in education lead you down toward this idea of focusing on assessment?
So I think honestly, my teachers that I had, there were some teachers who were and still are beloved individuals to me. And I loved the way that they worked in the profession, and I loved the connection that I had with them as their students. And I wanted to emulate that. I wanted to be them, and they inspired me to go into education.
Yeah.
And so I did.
Yeah. And then the assessment part, where did that come from?
The assessment part actually leans on what Nat was just saying around our shared gymnastics past.
Okay.
And as I started to kind of explore topics in my thesis, I mean, I went into my master's program with a completely different idea on what I would do my research on. And of course, that didn't happen at all. As I started to reflect on my past in sports and being a high-level athlete, I realized the way that I was assessed in sport also influenced how I assessed as an educator in a classroom. And as soon as I started to make those connections, everything kind of aligned. And that really paved the way for me to explore assessment.
This directly connects then to your master's research, right? Which was around this topic of assessment identity. And those two words separately make a lot of sense, but when you put them together, it's a whole new concept that I know I don't have a whole depth of knowledge on, and probably a lot of people listening don't have a depth of knowledge on. But can you let's start with the basics. What does it mean, and why do you think it really matters for educators to reflect on?
Yeah, so assessment identity actually is quite an untapped area of research in North America specifically. There's a few folks in the Maritimes, researchers, Andrew Coombs, Chris DeLuca, their team, who have done some work. And I relied heavily on their research in my research. There's also some research coming from New Zealand and the UK, but that's kind of it. And so assessment identity essentially is a compilation of all the things of educators, what their experiences with assessment as students themselves from K to 12 and in university and other post-secondary programs, and then also their stories as a human being. Because I truly believe that our personal and professional lives are inextricably linked. So what we bring forward as assessors in a classroom or in a learning community, and all those stories and experiences that shape who we are as assessors.
How does reflecting on my assessment identity, how does that change the way a teacher might interact with their students or the way that they might assess?
I have direct personal experience with this one.
Okay.
So,
Tell.
when I started reflecting on my own assessment identity and essentially experimenting with what I came to understand it to be, I realized the more I reflected on how I was assessed is that's how I was assessing my own students.
Right.
And that was a huge aha moment for me because I realized that I was just doing what I knew. And that wasn't necessarily the best practice. And that really made me interrogate myself and what I was doing in my classroom based on all of my own experiences, my assessment identity.
I think that's a really important point about how our K-12 experience as students really does shape the way that we assess. Can you think of a positive or even a negative experience that, like one particular experience that may have a disproportionate amount of influence over you, or just something that you really look to? Well, the totality of our experience likely shapes the way that we assess. Is there one moment or one experience that you had that may disproportionately have influenced that assessment identity for you?
Absolutely. The more I think about it, the more examples I keep coming up with. So this is very much like a work in progress for me too. I can think of examples from my past as a high-level athlete, but also as a student in the K-12 system. So one example I can share is from my experience as a grade 11 art student. And I did art at my high school with the same teacher in grade 8, 9, 10, 11. And I actually had the opportunity to go on exchange in grade 11 to Germany.
Okay.
So off I went. I was away for a semester. I had an art class and a German class that I was missing back at home. So that was pretty easy to cover while I was away. And I did my little art projects and I brought them back and I handed them into my teacher. We had a few weeks left of school before our semester ended. And she said to me, "Oh, well, thank you for the work." And she gave me 85% on a project. That's a B. Yeah. And I was like, well, why didn't I get an A? Because I was that student. I wanted that A. And she said, "Oh, if you want an A, do the work again." That was all the feedback I got.
Yeah.
And so because I wanted that A, I did the work again. But what she didn't know about that particular project, it was acrylic paint on a board, was that I had taken the photo at this monument in Germany that was deeply connected to my family's history. It was a film camera, so I developed the film. I then painted the work based off the photo that I took. So there was a whole story there that she didn't even know about. And because I was so driven to want that A, I did the work again. I did the whole project again. And when I resubmitted it, I got 86%. So I got the A. And here's the kicker. I didn't take art in grade 12 because that was it for me. It ruined the experience. And I decided not to enroll in her class. And she was so angry with me. She didn't talk to me for my whole grade 12 year. She didn't look at me in the hall. I graduated. There were no words exchanged. And that was the end of a relationship.
Ridiculous. And listeners, for those of you who don't work or live in British Columbia, you may not realize that threshold, we have the strangest grading scale in North America, that 86 to 100 is an A and 85 back to 73 is a B. And the idea that you got an 85 and then redid the entire project to go up 1 percentage point, and she had the nerve to be that petulant, and that, I mean, it's no wonder that experience came to mind for you. I mean, what an awful experience to have the idea that the margin of error on percentage grades alone would have it be that it would be an A-level quality or something like that. I digress. I don't want to go on another rant about what you experienced, but that story is horrific.
I feel it. And it's crazy because you just triggered a story I've literally never thought of. And I'm not trying to do narrative takeover here. I'm really trying to be cognizant of that. So thanks for holding space for Karley's story. But I actually quit band after years being in band with the same teacher, and that teacher lost it on me. Same thing, and wouldn't talk to me. And I felt that deep personal hurt as well from and he had done something humiliating to me around assessment in the classroom. I won't even get into the story, but it was traumatizing, absolutely traumatizing to me as a grade 9 girl. And that killed my entire band journey. And it's funny because years later, his wife reached out via Facebook and was like, you're one of his favorite students. You should come to his retirement party. And I remember being like, what planet are you people on? The fact, but then it makes you realize how many times did I do things with the best of intentions that traumatized some child who went forward into the future and was like, please never contact me again.
Right.
I think that's a fair comment about, look, as teachers, we're all imperfect and we may do things that inadvertently have a negative impact on a student or do something that we don't intend to. But in the aftermath of that is where I have the biggest issue, which is this idea that an adult wouldn't talk to you, or that there's that lack of awareness. That's where I have the problem. It's not that we're not prone to making mistakes and doing things that maybe have an impact on a learner that we don't realize. A flippant comment that we make may be traumatizing to that student, and we have to own that and just come back and recover from that, as opposed to just becoming petulant and not talking to you for basically a year after you graduated. I mean, that is really a really unfortunate story.
Seriously.
Yeah.
There's so much to unpack there that I feel like we need to deep dive. But
for sure.
I mean, I am curious because you tell so much of your own stories, Karley. How much have you heard? Because you work with so many educators. How many stories have you heard in return that just really mirror this pattern or have it manifest in slightly different ways? You know, like, what are you hearing from people?
It's funny. And it's kind of wild. I mean, you just experienced the same thing where you were like, oh, I've never even thought of that before.
That was huge. Yeah.
That particular story that I just shared, I actually hadn't thought of and connected to my work and my research until we moved recently, because I found that piece of artwork. I kept it. And I unwrapped the paper towel that was around it, and I saw it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I get full body shivers just thinking of that now. So I hadn't even made that connection. And so many people, when I share these stories, and there are lots of them, have the same kind of epiphany that you just had, where they're like, oh, this happened to me and I never thought of it in that way. And now I do X, Y, Z, I think because of that. And it's really interesting to me, the level of depth that educators can go to in their reflections when they really start to think about this and their own experiences. And it's on the flip side, in our province, in BC, as educators, we are not required or mandated to do any sort of reflecting once we're in the career.
Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating?
It's wild.
It's actually, like, dare I say, like a little negligent.
I would agree.
We're in this learning profession and there's no true expectation for deep reflection.
And yet we have to provide a self-assessment or reflective experience for our learners every term or semester, but we don't have to do it ourselves.
Right.
Well, in Alberta, we had something called, I don't think you have this in BC, called the Teacher Quality Standards. And for leaders, it was the Leader Quality Standards. And there is an expectation of some kind of portfolio reflection. It really becomes a little bit more of like a checkbox make work, like, oh, here's a couple artifacts from my lessons where I did that. You know, it's not really it's kind of like what happens with assessment when it's not done thoughtfully. It's a little bit more of like a, hey, here's the grade you got, and I'm going to explain in my feedback why you lost marks. It's that same kind of a process, right? It's kind of a compliance.
It's happening over here, kind of separate, and it's not truly embedded.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about your assessment accelerator program, because a big part of your research that you landed on, because this was when we had this like, together, was the power of mentorship.
Yes.
And how much mentorship is needed to be able to have that experience we literally just had. These like epiphany moments in these safe, non-judgmental, non-hierarchical spaces. And so you've been holding that space for a number of educators over a year now, right?
It's been over a year now.
That you've been doing it. That's so exciting. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
What are some of the common barriers and struggles that you're seeing folks bump up against when you're in that mentorship space with them to embracing assessment differently? Yeah.
So essentially, the assessment accelerator for educators is the product of my research, of my thesis. So I wrote my thesis in a narrative inquiry approach because I like to share through story. But it was still a data-driven thesis, so it didn't have a product at the end. And I felt that it was very unfinished. So I thought I would do like a doctorate to make a product. And then I didn't. I applied, got in, chose not to do it, and instead created this program. And now I'm in my 5th cohort of running this program. And the coolest thing about it is where we get to deep dive into this small group cohort, deep conversations like what we've just shared, and really start to interrogate our experiences in our own respective journeys and how all of those experiences shape our assessment identity as educators. And the neat thing about assessment identity is that every single person is going to be different because our experiences and our perceptions are all different. But when I've noticed when folks start to really come to terms with what their assessment identity is, knowing that it's not a finite process, this is going to happen and shapeshift over time as we have more experiences, they're like, oh, they can make decisions through the lens of their assessment identity, which honestly essentially shifts how they do assessment in the classroom. It shifts their whole practice. I've worked pretty closely with one educator through my very first cohort and then throughout the year, and I'm still working with her now. And she said, she's a newer teacher, and she said in her teacher education experience, she had nothing like this. And this has been the missing piece, quote unquote, of her teacher education training.
If we had $1 for every time we heard this assessment thing was the missing piece of everything.
It's constant.
Right?
It's always that center, that engine that drives everything else. And usually people will say once that clicks for them, everything else clicks for them. Do you find that as they unpack their own assessment identity, do you find that teachers change just kind of how they view assessment, or does it translate into like day-to-day logistical, like how I do assessment on a day-to-day basis, or is it more of a philosophical shift that they have, or is it both?
I was going to say both.
Okay.
Yeah, I think both. It starts with this deep philosophical shift and how they think about assessment first, which I honestly think is the prerequisite to shifting the practice. And that's great if they take some time to really start to think about their assessment identity and how they came to be where they are. They're starting to shift that narrative of what assessment is in their mind. And when that happens, then they start to see all these practices that they do or don't do and realize, oh, I need to make some changes here. And I always, always, always encourage folks to start small. Like small steps often, less is more. Because if they start to take on these changes and they try to do them all at once, that's completely overwhelming. And then they'll just check out because it's too much.
It is one of my favorite cliches, if you will, when it comes to all of this assessment work, which is think big, start small, and just take baby steps, right? And not overwhelm yourself. You know, go there in the mind, you go there and act. The idea that I have to think differently about it and it will cause different actions. So I love the fact that you're starting in that space of like, who am I? What is my identity? And then how does that translate in what I do every day? So, you know, assessment can be overwhelming for some teachers if depending on your experience and depending on your training and what you've decided to do professionally. So it can feel very overwhelming to a lot of people, especially here in BC with the shifts in the competency based and all of that. So if a teacher is feeling overwhelmed by assessment itself and many aspects of it, what's one small, very practical shift that, I mean, there's a lot of different angles to go. But if you were to say pound for pound, if you made this one simple, practical shift in your practices, this is going to make you feel a lot more confident about how you approach assessment.
Okay. So there's one strategy that I've been talking about a lot lately when I'm sharing with educators. And I think I love it because of how easy it is. You don't need to do any prep. You literally need to talk and that's it. So you can bring it anywhere with you. And it's actually, I've shifted it from a social emotional learning or an SEL strategy to be something that you can use in an SEL context, but then add assessment to it.
Okay.
So I learned about this over a decade ago. I've done it with my own students in my own class for over 13 years. It's called the 2x10 strategy.
All right.
It means 2 minutes per kid by 10 days. And the catch here is that you won't even need to do it for 10 days. So 2x10. And essentially what it is you choose a student you want to connect with. You need to connect first. And it might start as an SEL approach. So you're going to be like, hey, Tom, how was your weekend? Start with the most basic kind of question and just start a dialogue with that student. It's so simple. And the kid's going to be like, good. And then you're going to have to say, well, tell me more. What did you do? And you just have that back and forth for 2 minutes. The next day, you initiate conversation again. Hey, you mentioned yesterday that you went to football practice. How did it go? And you initiate that again. One story that sticks out for me is in my very first full-time contract, which was my second year of teaching. I was 25 years old, teaching grade 8. And I had a kiddo who drove me bonkers. It was literally like the human form of a Labradoodle. And I was like, I need to connect with this kid and I don't know how. And so I tried this 2x10 strategy. By day 4, I didn't have to initiate conversation anymore. The kid was coming to me and then I never had an issue anymore. So when we take this approach through an assessment lens, it could be literally any kind of small bit of feedback around any kind of learning task. And you can say, hey, Natalie, I noticed like in your writing, you are missing some details here. Let's talk about this quickly. And then you can have that 2-minute conversation. And then the next day, expand upon that conversation. It's like conferencing in your pocket, like the mini of miniest conference.
Right. I love that progression to it. Like that idea of like a quick touch base is so powerful, but it's the follow-up because it's like that power of spaced practice or interleaving that they talk about in the research. I think that would be a really powerful thing. How have you helped folks with the objection of like, well, it's a high school teacher. They've got 5 classes of 30 kids and they're like, Karley, that sounds nice, but I have like 180 kids I'd have to get through. It's not realistic.
Yeah.
What would you say? Like,
totally, because I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
Again, I just remind them to start small. Start with one kid.
Yeah.
That even if you have, 2 classes a week with that kid, just do that.
Yeah.
Just start with one.
Yeah.
And in terms of the documentation of that, then I encourage folks to, keep a note in your phone, write it on a sticky note, put it by your computer, whatever it is, use your brain to hold that information. Like the amount of information educators hold in their head all day, every day is astounding. There is a way to just quickly document that and just start small because then after a week or 2, you might be able to handle 2 kids. And then it would grow to 3.
I think it's really important to remind folks here, and this is directly related to the webinar we just did this morning, that though the most effective feedback is a dialogue and not a monologue, which you're really showing, we have to always remember that it's about giving the right feedback to the right kid at the right time, you wrote about with Cassandra Erkins and Nicole Dimich in Essential Assessment. So there's a triage mindset we have to sometimes take here. But I think we have this fear as teachers that I have to do the exact same thing in the exact same way for all the kids, which leads to these very standardized approaches to assessment. And it's coming from a good place, like a place of fairness and a place of perceived equity. But in these moments, sometimes it's great to start from, like you in your story you told, start from those students whom need the most task reinforcement or support or connection. They're just really emotionally disengaged from what's going on, and that relationship could become that really beautiful tool to bring them back into the learning conversation. So reminding that it doesn't have to be everybody. Like choose a couple kids to start. And even if you do this on a monthly basis, there's some powerful work by Penny Kittle, who talks a lot about conferencing in the high school ELA classroom. And she says, like, just rotate. Like if even it's only a couple kids a day and you're rotating, or you've got some kind of a way to make sure eventually you're getting through everyone, I think that's really important.
Because if every 10 days or every 7 days or whatever your rotation is, you have a more detailed, intimate experience with a student. Over the course of time, you are going to have a body of evidence from those conversations. It's not just about the feedback, but it's about understanding what's coming from them. So when somebody says to me, oh, I've got 180 kids I have to teach, we've gotten into this binary bias where I can either go all in or I don't do anything. And as opposed to saying, I've got 180 kids, which is daunting. I don't want to dismiss the idea that I've got 150 kids on my roster. That is daunting, but that is a reason why this is more challenging, but it's not an excuse to do nothing. And I think that's where we have to start pushing ourselves a little bit, saying, okay, 150 kids, that does make this more challenging. Let's acknowledge that. What could I do? What kind of a rotation could I create? Maybe it's every 12 days for me to actually maintain my sanity, but have this kind of interaction with students. So I think that it's important
There's
to do that.
something really important to note here that you said that I really want to double tap on for people, that feedback is a dialogue and not a monologue. And you talked to that, but if you focus on 3 kids, like this is the whole kind of like outside pins approach, right, of UDL. If you listen deeply to those 3 kids and you learn from what they're telling you and the patterns of the errors they're making and misunderstandings they have, you now have information to go back to the whole group and to provide mini lessons and re-engagement opportunities. That is feedback too. I think we often forget that feedback is not a set of directions we deliver to kids. It's co-learning.
And what's more likely? That those 3 kids live in a silo and have no connection to the other 27 kids in the classroom? Or is it more likely that those 3 kids are giving you a window into what many of the other students in the classroom are thinking and what they're experiencing? So that type of sampling can even give a teacher insight as to where the friction is, where are the misunderstandings, and how are they navigating through all of that?
So something you often talk about, Karley, is this journey from frustration to confidence that many folks take around assessment, and you love to walk beside them along. What are the typical steps of that journey that people often move through?
There are very real steps too. This frustration, this tension, if you will, of feeling so overwhelmed that they're paralyzed. They can't do anything with assessment, right? And the first part of the assessment accelerator really is just kind of leaning into understanding what assessment identity is. How do you come to start scratching the surface of yours? I love the concept of the fact that you don't need to create an assessment identity. You just need to explore what's already there. Because all of us, all educators, have an assessment identity. It's just maybe untapped for them. So scratch the surface, start to explore that. And then once you start to explore that and feel comfortable with what that means for you as an educator and as a human being, then you can start to look at your assessment practice and start to view those practices or the tools that you use, for example, your most favorite assessment tools, through the lens of your assessment identity. And that I find really helps folks shift from this like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed, I have no idea where to even start. Gives them permission, in a sense, to step back, reflect, explore, and then move forward again with that confidence that they've gained because they actually start to understand what assessment means to them as an assessor in a classroom. It is wild, the shift that I've seen in folks that I work with, even just in 6 weeks. It's wild.
Yeah. Ultimately, this is about students, right? So let's talk about when you see folks go from that frustration and overwhelm to confidence, what are they telling you, or about, like, what are you inferring from the conversations you have with the people you work with about how that impacts students? How does that affect students and their experiences in the classroom?
Yeah. One educator I was working with last spring had said to me, and she was an early primary teacher, she was saying, I feel like I've lost the joy.
Yeah.
This woman was just feeling like she was doing all the assessment practices that the school was requiring of her, and it really didn't align with what she believed about assessment, but she didn't know that she believed that yet. And I was like, okay, through our time together, we're actually going to reclaim your joy, and we're going to do that through assessment. And she was like, okay, let's do it. So in the end, what we had done was we had recreated a whole inquiry-based unit of exploration for her learners for this school year. She felt that implementing it in the spring was just too much, and I totally agree. I was like, let's take our time here. So she was implementing it this school year, and it was reconnected to how she wanted to teach. It was through the lens of inquiry. We were able to create things that were cross-curricular and just create that tool together so that she could then implement it and feel good about it. And so when she recaptured her joy, of course, her learners are going to pick up on that.
Right. I can relate to that story so much, because when I tell the story of my journey, again, not to do narrative takeover here, but when I tell my story, I often talk about it from like how I graded as a high school, middle school teacher in the very traditional manner. But I also talk about this adversarial relationship that developed between me and some of my students. Not all my students. It's easy to teach the ones who are already motivated, the ones who are doing what they're told and being obedient. But then you think about the ones where you're constantly you're in gotcha mode. You're constantly in. And what I recognized was I was actually not enjoying the job. And so one of the byproducts of shifting my assessment practices wasn't just becoming more effective in the classroom, but it was actually reclaiming that joy. My relationships with my students changed because I had changed and shifted what I was really focused on. So I love that notion of reclaiming joy, because I think that affect or our disposition around work can really shift with what we do practically. The strategies that we implement can actually impact our disposition about how we feel when we go to work every day. And I know for some people that may be a bit, woo-woo or whatever. But okay, I mean, I just was not going to go to work for the next 20 years feeling this level of adversarial, tension with my students every single day. So something had to give. So for me, it was about shifting that.
And if folks want some research to back that, there is research. I mean, all of the educators, principals, superintendents, like people who work in research themselves in terms of assessment, when I coded all of that data from the stories and the interviews that I collected, and there was a decent sample size from across the province, what I found was that there were 6 core values that I kind of dug through that I found that were common with all these folks. And one of them was assessment as celebration. And I realized that was a huge missing link for a lot of my friends who work in education. And I'm discovering more and more folks they're missing that.
Okay, so I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about Canada sort of writ large and thinking about, and we'll get into the Canadian Assessment Center stuff momentarily, but let's just talk Canada for now and think about, as you kind of look at the landscape of Canada, the idea of assessment in Canada, this is kind of a two-parter, if you will. One is, what gives you hope as far as assessment in Canada is concerned, and where do you notice opportunities for growth? So let's start with the latter. Let's talk about opportunities for growth in Canada. Where do you think, while we may be working hard and we may be doing some really good work, where are there opportunities for us to continue to grow in Canada?
Absolutely. Great question, especially in terms of assessment identity, because recently when I've been working with schools, and this has been a particularly busy 2 weeks for me, these last 2 weeks have been all over the place. I've started asking folks, have you heard of assessment identity? I just want to know, like a quick poll, put your hand up or what have you. And one person said, I heard about it from your Instagram. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Great. Anyone else? And nobody had. And then the next group I worked with, I asked the same question and I added in the piece. Besides my Instagram, have you heard of assessment identity? And one person came up to me after and said, I've heard of assessment identity through a course I'm taking at a university. And I said, oh, it's because I wrote that course.
You're like,
so that kind of opened my eyes to the fact that really no one knows about this. So there's a lot of opportunity there to educate educators about assessment identity. And the shifts that I've seen with the folks I've worked with in the last year have been so profound that that's very exciting to me. It's very exciting to be working in this landscape that has so much potential to shift how educators see assessment and then how that impacts their students.
It would be a fair hypothesis to think that because educators have not explored their assessment identity, but their identity keeps showing up, maybe that's why there is so much friction when it comes to trying out new practices, because they haven't explored, like, why am I so opposed to that? Why does that bother me so much? The things that Karley or Tom or Natalie are talking about in the workshop, why is that causing me so much disrupt? And if I don't sort of mind my own story and think about that, it just keeps coming up as a resistance as opposed to exploring our identity. Okay, let's flip it. Let's flip it now and ask about hope. Okay. What gives you hope?
Okay, so there's a lot of hope basically for the reasons that I've just stated. But also another story is that I'm fresh back from Calgary working with a group of educators there in a high school, grade 10, 11, 12 in rural Alberta. And I've just started my second year working with them. So we worked all together last year and we're going to be working all together this year. And the shifts that I've seen in them have been also incredibly hopeful because we've done this kind of work and we've met those tensions and we've discussed those tensions and we've designed tools together. And now we've just started our second year where we've created inquiry questions to kind of have I say we, but all of them, all 30 of them, have their own direction that they want to follow in terms of assessment. And they can create their own direction now because we've done all this work together. It's so cool.
Oh, I love that.
That's amazing. There's so much there to double tap on. But let's circle back to this idea of the Canadian Assessment Center, which we are so excited to officially have launched. And you are, one of our founding consultants along with us. We have so much we're excited for, and we'll probably tack on to some things you say, but we'd love to pass it to you first as someone who's building this with us from the ground up. Like, what are you most excited about?
Okay, this is going to go back to gymnastics, but I thought I've been thinking about this.
Please tell me you brought your ribbon.
I did not. I'm so
Missed
sorry.
opportunity.
I mean, I wish I could have been like, my wrist is so sore. I can't do spirals.
Fine. I'll let you, I'll give you a pass.
Okay. So what I'm really excited about, hear me out.
Okay.
All right.
In gymnastics, my biggest goal of all time was to represent Canada. Oh, I'm going to get emotional here. My biggest goal was to represent Canada. And one of my stories I always share is about how I didn't compete at my 4th national team tryouts because of an injury. And that actually resulted in me quitting the sport altogether. It's a long story for another day or a different presentation. And since then, I've still always wanted to do work that's going to impact Canadians.
Yeah.
I think what I'm realizing now is that it wasn't my time to represent Canada in gymnastics.
Mm-hmm.
And I am coming to terms with that still, decades after I left the sport. Never in my dreams would I ever have imagined that it would have come in the form of assessment work. The very thing that drove me headfirst into this assessment work is a lot of my negative experiences of being judged and ranked and sorted as a high-level athlete, which I literally, like, if you could put all those things in a jar and put a lid on and set it aside for a couple decades to let it stew in itself and then open it and face all of that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then come to terms with it and move forward. Oh, and I know you're gonna really get this, Nat, because of our shared past in the gym together. But I have been reflecting on this, and I think this for me is like what I'm most excited about.
I just feel like there's so much to lift out of that, and for all of us to reflect on how we all are called to some bigger story, like to go back to identity and story, and it never manifests how we think it's going to. And this is ironically what we're talking about in our next podcast episode for a different podcast. But this idea that what's meant to be will be as soon as we become it. But if we try to force it, if we try to make it happen, like, I'm going to represent Canada for gymnastics, you end up with a broken ankle. Like, wasn't that what happened? Like,
yeah. I was on crutches.
It just breaks. And until you face it and become joy, become confidence, become whole, become worthy, then it happens. That's just like the truth of life and how energy works and how this whole cosmic soup operates. Like, we've talked about this how many times, Tom?
Countless times, about just that you who you are and what you represent, and forcing things. There's a book years ago written by Dr. David Hawkins called Power versus Force. And it's this idea that force is often hard and there's an edge to it, and it breaks, and power is in just allowing and awareness and the type of energy. And so it just wasn't your time, and representing Canada in a very different way. I don't know. We have to get some swag. Do we have to get some Team Canada jerseys, Canadian assessment jerseys and hats? I mean, I'm always down for that.
I want to go back to the 90s maroon and white. You know what I'm talking about. The OG RG.
Oh, the OG RG.
I wore that thing nonstop from like the age of 9 to 12, I feel like.
I'm pretty sure I still have it. And the BC team one where you basically had bat wings.
We have to remake
suits.
these. We have to remake these.
I am so envious.
And they gotta sound like zip, 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 zip.
When you say 90s, I think of the starter jackets from the early 90s. Is that kind of like what they were? The puffy?
I would say it was a little after that in terms of, but it was like that
early
very
2000s.
Oversized, like that plasticky.
I love it.
Tracksuit, and they were always way too big. They were massive.
Well, and also now I'm so envious of. I mean, I was at the airport yesterday, and a whole rugby team showed up in the lineup, and I was like, "Look how cool you all look in your nice gear." I never looked that cool when I was representing BC or Canada anywhere.
No.
We're gonna have to look into that. We'll have some Canadian assessment swag as we go.
My childhood dreams come true.
Exactly. Karley, we want to thank you for being here, listeners. If your school or district would love the opportunity to have Karley facilitate some professional learning, you can certainly reach out to us at the Canadian Assessment Centre. Our email address is info@canadianassessment.ca, and we'd be happy to talk about how we could facilitate that professional learning experience. Karley, where else can people find you besides Instagram, which is a big one? But are there other places where people can find you, connect with you, social media? What are the handles?
Instagram is my main platform for social media. It's at accessible_assessment.
Okay.
My email is hello@karleyalleyn.com. Now check the spelling of my name because that's a tricky one. There's some Y's in there. I am also on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can just search Accessible Assessment and you'll find me.
Okay, fantastic.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing this time with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, that's it for this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Assess That.
And don't forget to follow Assess That on Twitter, X, or Instagram. We've got links in the show notes for those.
If you have any specific topics you'd love for us to talk about, you can DM either of us on those platforms.
And a reminder to check the show notes for links to all those upcoming professional learning events.
Please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, as that helps us grow the podcast's reach.
And finally, if you really like what you're hearing, please keep spreading the word about the podcast to your friends, your colleagues, or on social media. We would really appreciate that.
We'll see you in 2 weeks, everyone.